Right, we're talking about advertisers changing. It's been a common theme, really. If you've been following Media Snack, certainly, well, for the last 2 years, really, but the last month or two, there's been a lot of talk about advertisers changing. A couple of weeks ago, you hosted a really good session at the Festival of Media, which was in Rome, which was called Taking Charge and Driving Change, featuring advertisers, LVMH and Deutsche Telekom.
That's right.
And that was interesting because it really gave an insight into, actually, it's the advertisers that are driving change. It's not just the agency landscape that's changing, it's advertisers that are driving that change. So we'll link to that. It's really good. You should watch the session if you have time.
That's right. And what we illustrated in that session was the progression of control that advertisers are going on.
Yeah.
And we call it the 5 states of media control. And it's all about kind of the journey that advertisers are on in terms of taking more responsibility and more accountability for decision making internally.
Yeah, exactly right. Again, we'll link to that because that was an episode we did probably about a month ago, but lots of people have been talking about that. Yeah. Dollars, data, decision making, that's where the control is happening. So have a look at that. The reason that we're talking about change is because this week, the WFA, again, frequently quoted by us. They do a lot of really good research. There's yet another WFA report landed on our doorstep this week. And this one is called The Future of Agency Rosters, which is really interesting. And it's a survey of members. So what were there's lots of things in there. What stood out for us?
Another good report from the WFA, 2 key kind of observations that I took from it. The first was that 75% of the respondents were looking to change their agency roster structure because they didn't think that it was currently fit for purpose. Yeah. So that's a big statement.
Yeah, and that's in line with our experience as well. Yeah. Speaking to many advertisers, that many of them are saying that.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, the other kind of big insight that I took from the report was that, especially on the agency side, but also I think endorsed by many clients, the reason that the agency roster structure wasn't working was simply because the corporate culture, the client culture and structure wasn't enabling the agency roster to work effectively. Yeah. So it was kind of an internal problem that was kind of symptomatic of the challenges that they had within the agency structure.
And that's a really good, it's very positive evolution of that narrative. Yeah. So maybe even just a few years ago, any perceived dysfunction or frustration would often get blamed on the agency and the roster or agencies not working well together. This is quite insightful because it's advertisers, kind of taking a lot of responsibility and accountability for their own structures and acknowledging that causes some of the complexity amongst agency rosters, which is really good. So what that tells us, and it's very explicit in the report, and it's very much in line with our experience working with many of WFA members and other advertisers around the world, is that they are addressing the internal challenge first, which is something we very strongly advocate. You'll know if you're a loyal viewer, that's what we talk about a lot. Address that internal structures first before you start trying to figure out what the external roster looks like, which was really the message in your Festival of Media session as well, wasn't it?
And I think that's what most kind of smart progressive advertisers are doing. And you mentioned Deutsche Telekom and LVMH, and they're 2 prime examples of businesses that have looked internally to try and reorder themselves to future-proof their business, and then go out and make sure that they've got the right kind of roster in place to fulfill that.
Yeah, and then the other thing that's come out from that WFA report, and also mentioned in other reports they've done, is the increasing use of specialists. So consultants, of which we obviously consider ourselves and very proud to be included in that. Working with many of these advertisers, with many of the WFA members, to focus on that internal process and structure. And so we should mention there was another WFA report, like a month or so ago, called the Independent Media Advisors Report, which was really interesting because it looked for the first time at this kind of growing market of what they call them independent media advisors. So it includes companies like us, like the consultancies specializing in media and advertising. It includes kind of the auditors and people like And it broke media advisors down into these 5 functional areas. So for the first time, it's kind of put a framework on that growing industry, which is very helpful.
I think I'm allowed to say that we were really proud to be
You're
named.
allowed to say that?
Well, we were incredibly proud and honoured to be named as the kind of the most frequently used in 2 of those categories, consulting and agency management. So that was it was really good.
Yeah, and in that report, again, that's something you can get from the WFA. 59% of WFA members said they are relying on external consulting support to address some of these kind of change challenges.
And the reason I think that is so important is because as external consultants, we have a perspective on multiple operating models.
Yeah.
And so we're able to kind of provoke that type of discussion using kind of our experience of seeing how many advertisers operate.
Yeah.
And that can often make a slightly more informed perspective for that client himself.
Yeah, exactly. So for those advertisers out there that are thinking about maybe absorbing this information from the WFA reports, thinking about changing their own organisation, what's the start point? What do you start thinking about?
Well, typically, when advertisers come to us with this kind of challenge, we go through a couple of steps. The first is have a vision, have a strategy, have an ambition for media. Yep. The next thing you need to do is you need to understand where you currently are, to establish a baseline. We often help our clients by doing an internal diagnostic to enable them to understand what their current operating model looks like, where their strengths and weaknesses are, but importantly, where they are looking to go, what their to-be evolved state is going to look like. And then we interrogate all of the operating models that are out there, and we help them identify the one that is the most relevant. And then we can kind of fine-tune that and refine that into something that's particularly appropriate to their requirements. Yeah. Because there's no silver bullet with these things. Yeah. And that's important to mention.
Yeah, exactly. So there's, the report lists these kind of 5 or 6 different models. In our experience, there are shades of grey between those things, and it's more than just kind of picking one for you, because it has to be somewhat customised to the needs of your particular business. It is fascinating, though. Yeah. That's the one thing. It's really, we enjoy that work. Doing the diagnostic and then working with a marketing and procurement team to identify the right process and the structures for managing media is really interesting, because it's not a discipline that's being delegated off to the agency roster now. That's right. Marketing organisations are taking a bit more control, certainly in the decision making and the structure of the process. So that's fascinating. So we love that kind of work. If you want to know more about that, the process, you can comment, or you can reach us through the website, obviously, or leave a comment down below. Right, good week 4.
AT&T.
Yes.
So this is AT&T is the US's biggest telecommunications business. Yep. And it has just had its acquisition of Time Warner, $85 billion acquisition of Time Warner, which owns CNN, HBO, Warner Brothers. Has had it approved by the federal court. Yes. So this is now an enormous company, and they've been, I think, in court for 2 years, waiting for this to be put through. They've had the green light. It has set a precedent. I think we're going to see even more massive mergers and acquisitions within the kind of the media publisher world coming on the back of this,
which raises competitiveness. Ideally,
absolutely. Good. Bad week 4.
Well, this is an obvious one. I think if you've been unless you've been on holiday in some remote place, part of the world, you won't have failed to spot that it's been a pretty bad week for Mr. Martin Sorrell and his previous employee, WPP. Yes. Because, we won't go into the details, I'm sure you can kind of read this kind of sensationalist kind of stories elsewhere, but information leaked from WPP about this, the reason for his departure, or the reason that they filed this kind of investigation and subsequently he stepped down. The kind of blowback on that, if that's not an inappropriate word, is that it doesn't look very good on him. It feels like a bit of a smear, somewhat, and it doesn't really look very good on WPP, who look like they've made a bit of a mess of this, not releasing the information. And Robert Querter, the chairman, is under pressure this week at the AGM. That's right. For how he's managed this, and it now looks a bit messy. And actually, I think your point this morning was, the person that's coming out of this looking really good is Mark Reed, who's the kind of the stand-in at the moment, and perhaps could be a future CEO of WPP. So this is maybe looking good for him, but a bad week for everybody else involved, I think.
Absolutely.
Okay, before we go, should mention next week is Cannes Lions. So we'll be flying in and out for a couple of meetings. We won't be there very long, thankfully. But if you're going, have a good time. We might see you there. But the only other thing remains is the question of the week. Are agency rosters fit for purpose?
Yes, no, whatever.
Excellent, good. That's your media snack for this week. Thank you for watching. Please do give us a thumbs up if you like what we're doing, but that's all for now.
See you next time.
Right, we're talking about Advertisers change. Sorry, I thought you tutted.
No, I wasn't touching.
So the only remains to pose the question of the week, which I don't know what it is.